Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is May the 1st, 2018, and I'm here with Professor Mark Malin, who is retiring at the end of this semester. And I just wanted to have a few minutes with Professor Malin and ask him to talk about his time at Randolph-Macon. So, Mark, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in Spanish language and literature?
It's it's a interesting story. I said in my comments on the retirement celebration the other day that I didn't get my PhD until 23 years after graduating from high school. So I didn't go through the normal way. I spent a lot of time working in different jobs, worked on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico and on land rigs in Louisiana. I took Spanish in high school. And along the way, I actually trained for doing oil field work in Pau, France, for Dowell Schlumberger. And one of the guys I knew quite well was a guy from Argentina. And so he and I spoke quite a bit of Spanish together. So when I finally did go back to college, I knew I wanted to take Spanish, and I took it just for fun. So I went to University of New Mexico for 2 years and took Spanish, and I had a Chicano roommate, and so he and I spoke a lot of Spanish together. So it was just kind of an interest I had. Mm-hmm. So when I went to the University of Colorado and got my undergraduate degree, which was 10 years after graduating from high school, I remember taking a Spanish lit class. And I commented to myself if I do well on this first exam, I'll have a major in Spanish, because I went there knowing I wanted to get a major in environmental conservation. And I probably can't remember very many grades, but I got a 94 on that exam. So I ended up majoring in Spanish and graduated, and then it was quite a few years later before I went back to grad school. But I had the opportunity to go to grad school both in biology and in Spanish, and I opted for Spanish. I a little bit tongue-in-cheek say that the reason why is I got more money from Spanish than I did from biology, but realistically is where my passion was.
Right. Well, that's really good to hear, especially in this current environment where many people might have thought that the environmental studies, biology, might have been more as a marketable quote than the Spanish. So I'm glad you followed your passion.
Me too.
Well, tell us how and when you happened to come to Randolph-Macon.
So, like most of us in languages, especially when I graduated, when you got your PhD, you went to the Modern Language Association convention, and I actually went 1 year. I went in 95, I guess it was, and had quite a few interviews, and actually got 3 job offers, 1 tenure track and 2 part-time, and we decided not to take the job, we meaning my wife and I. And so I went back to MLA the next year again with PhD in hand and got an interview with Randolph-Macon. And I will not forget the interview, which was up in Washington, D.C., and then got called back for an on-campus interview. And I told the story too at my retirement. I missed the airplane flight because of icy roads in Denver. I couldn't get to the airport.
Oh.
And so I felt, very small.
Oh, yeah.
But I ended up having Fred Worth, who was here at the time. I had his office phone number and called frantically as I made alternate arrangements. And so ultimately it was a good on-campus interview. I really wanted to get that job offer, and I did. So my wife and I said yes, and it was, as I said earlier, it was one of the best yeses I've ever said.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So you interviewed with Fred Worth, and do you remember who else?
I
and
do.
Was in this
it was
department?
Fred Worth, Lisa Arbowes, and Amy DeGraff were the three who were up in Washington for that. And Amy was the chair, and why I had Fred's number and not hers, I really don't know, but that's whose number I had, so I remember calling him quite a few times from payphones.
Right.
That's what you did.
Right. This was 1996.
1996.
Right. Well, maybe because he was the Spanish connection.
That could have been it. Well, Lisa was too, but I had Fred's number. But.
Well, that's a great story. So many stories I've heard on Macon Memories are, it feels at one level like it's sort of happenstance or coincidental that people ended up here, but once they're here, this was the place for them.
Right, and I actually remember I stayed at Macon House, and this was in early January, if my recollection is correct, and it was raining. And I just said, in Colorado, it never rains in January. If there's precipitation, it's snow. But I remember staying at Macon House, and like a good academic, to kill time, that night after having dinner, I came over to the library and wandered around McGraw-Page Library.
Oh, good. Well, that's a good memories. And I'll just say for the record, we're having this interview today in the library, so we're coming full circle. Well, can you talk a bit about the Romance Language Department, as I believe it was called at that time, when you first arrived and how it evolved?
Yeah, wow. So, it was Romance languages, so German was separate. There's been a lot of personnel change since then. And so when Fred Worth retired quite a few years ago, now I don't remember exactly what year, and I really don't remember what year it was when it became Modern Languages. It was when Robert Barrett retired. And when Robert retired, or just before his retirement, was when German was added into the fold.
And it became modern.
And it became modern languages.
Right. So, would you like to talk about some of the courses you taught, and especially your love of Don Quixote?
Yeah, that was one of the great things. So when I was at Colorado, like most of us grad students, taught language essentially. So when I came here, my first semester, I taught Spanish 251, an introduction to Spanish literature. And it was quite a learning experience, teaching literature for the first time. I may have taught a story here or there in teaching language. And was very fortunate. Fred Worth was the Cervantes person. He was teaching Don Quixote. And he gave me the opportunity very early on to teach it in Spanish, as he let me do the course instead, and that ended up being mine. And I think it had to have been around 2003, 2004, something in there, that I proposed it as an honors course for J-term. And it got approved. And so I've been teaching it just about every other year as in English translation as an honors course. And it's just the greatest novel ever written. I mean, to me, I tell students, I said, well, after you read Don Quixote, the sky is bluer, the sun shines brighter, water tastes better. It's just everything.
Oh, that's great. Well, do you teach it in Spanish anymore, or you just teach it in the honors?
No, it was dropped
as a Spanish
from the curriculum.
Right.
And which I don't think should have happened, quite honestly. But because I was teaching it as an honors course, and because teaching it as an honors course in English translation, I could end up reading more of the novel than I was able to do in Spanish. It's been a good trade-off. And I've just absolutely loved teaching that course to honor students, because they come in, they've read, they think critically, it happens in lots of classes, but they participate, they ask hard questions. It's just a delight.
Well, that's good. Well, and I think they, from all I gather, is the honor students feel the same way. They love it.
It's worked well.
Yeah.
So
they love that
it's
course.
been a very felicitous combination.
Very good. But you still teach. You've still been teaching the language learning as well.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody.
As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that I like about teaching at a place like Randolph-Macon. I love teaching language, and if in a lot of places, if you're a full professor, if you're a 10-year track or even a tenured professor, you teach literature. You don't really have the opportunity to teach, undergraduate language courses, and I've just always gotten a lot of joy out of teaching those courses.
That's great. Well, I'm sure you brought a lot of joy to your students.
I try.
I'm sure you have. Well, another one of your research interests I saw was the epistolary novel, or use of letters and music and culture and literature. Can you talk about how you developed that interest?
I took a course that was my first year in grad school, I think it was. We had a visiting professor. The chair at Colorado cleaned house when he came in and used a lot of visiting professors. So we had a visiting professor from the University of Massachusetts, Hal Boudreau, and I won't forget him. So he taught two courses. He taught a course on literary theory, and he taught a course on the 19th century Spanish realism and the realist novel. And I'd never heard of literary theory before, and I just remember him making a comment out of a book called Epistolarity, and by Janet, and I'll come up with her last name, but Altman, and so I was just fascinated with the fact that somebody would write a book about letters used to make novels. So it piqued my interest, and then I happened to find a copy of that book in one of these big, they set up a warehouse to sell books, and there it was. And so I bought it for $1, I think it was, and so I just started being fascinated. I did a couple papers on actually after I was here. So I wrote my dissertation on the Spanish epistolary novel from the 19th century was the title of it, but I started from 1800 to 1900 were the bookend novels, and no one had done that in Spanish at that point, although a lot had been written about Russian epistolary fiction, French epistolary fiction, and not as much about Spanish. And so I gave a paper on a novel entitled Cornelia Bororquia, and at the University of Missouri, or may have been in St. Louis, but it was sponsored by a group of mid-American universities. And so one person who listened to the paper was Ana Rueda, who at that time was a professor at the University of Missouri, and she says, I think you and I share a fascination. I think we've also both come to realize is really a bit more like an obsession with the epistolary novel. She was working on a book at that time called Cartas sin lacrar, which is letters without sealing wax. And so it was about the 18th and early 19th century Spanish epistolary novel. And so it started a great professional relationship that I still maintain with Ana. And so that there was a bunch of novels that were very little read, undiscovered. And so she brought a lot to light. And so it's just been a very fruitful avenue for research.
That's great. So she had the 18th century into the 19th, and you were studying the 19th century. Have you taken it into the 20th century?
You know, actually, the epistolary novel has always been considered a feminine form. There are lots of feminist epistolary fiction. So my original idea was to begin with the 19th century and go on into the 20th century, because I knew of some novels in the 20th century. Well, when I was doing dissertation research, I met a guy who had gotten his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, which is where this Russell Sebold, who was a legendary figure in 18th century Spanish literature. And so this Jesus Pérez Magallón, we were staying at this place in Madrid called the Residencia de Estudiantes, and he said, well, why don't you go backwards and go into the 18th century? And I said, well, there's really not many novels from the 18th century, are there? Because that's kind of what I had learned. And he says, well, it's not that easy. So he suggested and gave me some titles, and then I started poking in more. So I really have very much more moved from the 19th century into the 18th century.
Okay.
Particularly. However, it's not a clean division, because in Spanish we really don't consider the 19th century to start in literature until 1834. So in 18th century studies we call it the long 18th century anyway. And so in Spain our 18th century goes up to about the 1830s. So there's lots of overlap. And so part of one of my research goals is to help fill that gap and add to our knowledge of the epistolary and sentimental novel of the late 18th and early 19th centuries.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Well, another course I did want to talk about is the J-term travel course that you taught in 2015. Can you talk about that a little bit? Tell us about how that came about.
You know, I'd gone to Spain with students, I guess, 4, maybe 5 times previously. And it's a lot of work to put together a J-term trip, so I wasn't sure I was going to do another one. But Awisha Hilliard and Jane Newcup from Office of International Education knew that I'd lived in Santiago. My wife and I spent a year in Santiago when I was a grad student. And so they asked if I would be interested in doing a course, because the theme for that year's Office of International Education was pilgrimage. So I thought about it and decided to do it. So we put together this course, and so we spent 6 days walking from Tui, which is on the Portuguese border in Galicia. We took, there's many caminos to Santiago, but we took what's called the Camino Portugués, the Portuguese way. So we hiked from Tui on the border up to Santiago, roughly 120 kilometers in January, so it was not warm.
And how long did it take you to go? It's about 60 miles, I guess?
Yeah, so it's about, 120 kilometers, so 70...
About 70-some miles.
70-something miles. So we spent 6 days walking. So we got there, spent a day acclimating, and it was a beautiful day, probably in the 50s, sun shining, blue skies. And the next day we started to walk, and as we started to walk, it started to rain. And it rained all the way through.
The next 5 days?
Yeah, for 6 days in the rain. There were moments of no rain, but there were moments of absolutely torrential rains. But we made it.
Well, that just added to the pilgrimage aspect, your dedication.
That's not what the students said at the time, but they were very pleased that it was a big accomplishment for them, as it
Yes.
should have been.
Yes, yes.
A lot of them hadn't had a lot of experience. Well, it took 5 students, and then Jane Newcomb from from OIE, and that was quite the trip.
Well, that's good. Well, they'll never forget that, I'm sure.
And one of the things, one of the highlights is my students got to meet Dario Villanueva, who is currently the director of the Royal Spanish Academy of the Language.
Oh.
And I happened to know him. He actually visited a class when I was in undergraduate school, and that I didn't ever get to really have any ties with him, but in grad school I did, and so when I knew I was going, he was at that time secretary of the Royal Academy, and so I met with him the summer of 14, in June I believe it was, and I asked him if he would be willing to give a class to my students on Emilia Pardo Bazán, a great feminist Spanish writer of the 19th century, and he said yes. Well, in the meantime, between June and when we went in January, he was elected director of the academy, so his schedule became a little more crowded. But what a great experience
Yes.
for those students, because he was former president of the University of Santiago.
Wow.
And so he told the students that he had to catch a flight that afternoon back to Madrid because he had a meeting the next day with the King of Spain.
Wow.
And so my students said, that guy really is the most interesting guy in the world, playing off the Budweiser commercial.
Oh, right.
So, or the Dos Equis commercial.
Yeah, the
I guess
Dos
I
Equis,
did.
right.
Dos Equis. So, anyway, what a great
interesting.
experience
Yeah.
for him, and for me. It was.
Yeah.
He's quite a guy.
Well, what a great trip and experience. Yeah, thank you. Any other courses you want to mention for the record that have been important?
Well, yeah, I've really enjoyed. I taught a couple of special topic courses on feminism in 18th and 19th century Spanish literature, where we actually went back into the golden age and traced feminist thought in both male and female writers, and that was lots of fun. So I got to teach stuff that I normally wouldn't have gotten to teach. And so I think the students enjoyed, seeing that, wow, yes, there were very forward-thinking women back in Spain in the 1700s, and of course some men who were not so forward-thinking. And that was just a lot of fun teaching that course.
That sounds very eye-opening. I wouldn't have known that myself.
Yeah, so I got to teach some stuff. I got to teach Maria de Zayas y Sotomayor and Fray Luis de Leon, things that I may not have gotten to teach because I was hired as a 19th century Spanish specialist, and so that's generally what I had taught in my special course. But doing this really let me to go back and teach some of the things that reflect where my research interests have evolved. So that was lots of fun.
That's a great thing about a place like Randolph-Macon, I think, where you are free to develop your interests and follow them.
And encouraged to do so.
You have been instrumental in making Randolph-Macon's chapter of Phi Beta Kappa one of the most active in the country. Can you talk about your work with the Zeta chapter of the Phi Beta Kappa?
It's been a big part of what I do here. One of the things I really want to emphasize, too, though, is that when I came in, it was actually Tom Pizer, who was president of the chapter at the time, who asked me about becoming the secretary, because Pat Dementi was getting ready to retire. And I asked him, is it a lot of work? And I don't know whether he had his fingers crossed or what he was doing. He says, no, it's not that bad. And, well, it is a lot of work. But one of the things I want to emphasize is it was a really strong, very organized chapter that Pat Dementi had done. So I want to give a lot of credit to Pat and the former officers. And before her, she was secretary for 15, 16, 17 years.
Wow.
And before her, George Oliver, for whom the Oliver room right here in the library is named, just a renowned history professor. So George, too, was a very active nationally as well with Phi Beta Kappa. So I inherited a strong chapter, and so we've kept it strong, had good participation from the chapter members, and so was fortunate enough to get people's attention by writing reports and continually trying to enrich the student experience in Phi Beta Kappa. And so in 2009 we received the award for the the certificate in excellence, or the most outstanding chapter at our liberal arts college for the 2006-2009 triennium. So it's been very fulfilling working with Phi Beta Kappa.
Well, congratulations on that. And I know you bring a very renowned speaker to campus each fall, and then you have your spring induction ceremony.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've tried to do is enhance student prizes. We give two what we call the Werner Awards. Mr. John Werner is our benefactor of our chapter, and we're very fortunate to have that kind of financial support. We have an endowment for Phi Beta Kappa, and of course John Werner is the pavilion also here in the library is named after Mr. Werner, and so we've used the financial endowment to enhance the liberal arts project at Randolph-Macon. We funded some trips for FYEs when we had the first year experience course. We've made an initiative to give out these Werner Awards, and to really make it quite a prestigious award for Phi Beta Kappa members.
Well, great. With the both Mr. Werner and Professor Oliver, are just great alumni of the college, and I just want to say I've done Making Memories interviews with both of them.
I know you have.
So,
so there's some pretty darn good shoulders to stand on.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
The chapter gets credit, but
you worked hard.
It's not all me.
But you worked hard, and I just want to say thank you for that. Well, also working with some of our top students, you have a couple of years ago took over the leadership of the college's honors program. You worked very hard to strengthen the program and its visibility. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit. You've mentioned honors courses before, but if you wanted to talk a little bit about the honors program at Randolph-Macon.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting for when you go to national honors conferences or local and regional honors conferences, you realize that there are as many models out there for honors programs as there are honors programs. And so quite a few years ago we did a task force to look into the honors program and to suggest some changes. And then Beth
Gill.
Thank you. Beth Gill and Marisa Cull took over the honors program and made some really big changes. And then Professor Cull went on sabbatical, and Professor Gill left to be dean at Canisius College. And so I took over as honors director, implementing this program, which had not yet started. So it was quite a challenge to implement the program with some very innovative and forward-looking changes. And so some things work better than others, but that's always what you expect when you're making this big of a change. So I've directed the honors program for 2 years, and my colleague also in Phi Beta Kappa, April Marchetti, will take over the program next year.
Mm-hmm.
So they're making some changes. So they're keeping what seem to be working well for the students and
Mm-hmm.
making some changes in things that probably could have been tweaked.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So
Yeah.
we're keeping some of and one of the things that one of your colleagues, Lori Preston, will be doing an Honors 300 course in the
Mm-hmm.
fall,
Mm-hmm.
which is a problem-based or project-based learning course
Mm-hmm.
where the students will use their skills to work collaboratively in groups to realize a project.
Mm-hmm.
And so really excited
Mm-hmm.
about how that's going to turn out. So that's a piece that from Beth and Marissa's vision of the program that is still going to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the changes they made, they're keeping some of the exciting new elements from the program, and also looking back to some of the things that the students really liked, which were these traditional honors courses that
Mm-hmm.
we have offered. And there are so many colleagues who are offering and have offered over the years such innovative
Mm-hmm.
courses, too many to name.
Yeah.
But so that those will take a little bit more of a prominent role in
Yeah.
the way the program is going to move forward. And so I think it's the future is very exciting for it.
Good. Good. Well, thank you for your doing the heavy lifting on that as they made the changes.
It was interesting. Yeah.
Good. Well, you have won several prestigious teaching awards at the college, and I just want to name them for the record while we're here. That you've won the Thomas Branch Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2005 and 2016, and the Art Conway Enthusiasm for Teaching and Learning Award in this year.
That's my second.
Oh, okay. And you initially
2013. I think it might have been.
2013. Oh, okay. Sorry, I did my research. I broke down there, but thank you. I do want to have that on the record because congratulations.
Thanks.
That your teaching has been
you know,
recognized.
you put a lot of enthusiasm and love into do this because you love the students, because you know it's what really stokes my fire,
Mm-hmm.
the teaching piece.
Mm-hmm.
So being recognized is just that cherry on top of the
Mm-hmm.
of the whipping cream.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't expect it, but you get it. You're thrilled.
Yeah, right. It's a real honor, especially at a teaching college like this. That is really the very, very high honor. Congratulations on all of those. So did you want to talk any more about the teaching experience or your students or any memories on the teaching end of things that we haven't already talked about?
So what I said in my comments talking about retirement is the one thing that I will miss more than I know how to say is the students at Randolph-Macon. You know, it's just been a thrill beginning with the very first semester I was here, when I was teaching that first literature course and trying to figure out what I could get the students to do and how much was the right amount of material and everything else. I expected to walk out and see my tires slashed, but they never did. So those students never, they let me go through that learning curve and were generous and supportive, and that's been my experience with the students throughout. And so you ask them to do what you think they ought to do, and for the most part they respond. But we just have great kids here. It's just the bottom line. I really love Randolph-Macon students. It's been just a thrill and a privilege for me to be able to walk into that classroom. And, you know, I always say, you know, when at any job there's going to be junk going on, and not bad. But when you walk into that classroom, it all melts away, and you say, "What I'm here for is to teach the class and to get the students involved," and they've just been, like I said, a real thrill.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, I think the Art Conway Award sums up what you were describing about your early years. It's the enthusiasm for teaching and learning, and that it was you were learning along with the students.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
we continue to learn along with the students, and I think that is what keeps it fresh.
Yeah, even if you've taught the course several times before, you want it to be different. You tailor it for each group of students. So, yeah, you learn from them all the time. And I remember one of the things Deanna Woolard and I did when we taught a first-year experience class together. We asked the students the very first day of class, because they didn't know each other, they didn't know us, we didn't know them, but we had our first meeting upstairs in Estes and had lunch, and both Deanna and I told the students a little bit about ourselves and our road to academia, she in physics, me in Spanish. And we asked the students to tell us something interesting about themselves. And, I'll never forget the kind of things that they told us. One kid was amazing at Rubik's Cubes.
Oh, wow.
And another was an expert marksman. And they had all these facets to themselves. And that's what you have to realize, is that you can't just say, this is a college student. And that's all they are, because they're all individuals. And so it's great to get to know them as individuals and see what their passions are, to see what they like to do in their spare time. And, because we have so many kids who are involved in sports, in philanthropic endeavors, in starting their own philanthropic organizations. It's amazing what our students do.
Well, I'm interested in the combination between the physics and the Spanish. What was your first year experience course?
Well, so Deanna and I had worked together as co-chairs of the scholarship committee. And I say that anything I wrote, I sent it to her and she rewrote it. And anything she wrote, she sent it to me and I rewrote it. So we knew we could work together, because we never got defensive about the changes either one made to our writing. So we knew we could work together. And so we were trying to figure out what it was we wanted to do. And so we settled on narratives and science of discovery. So she taught about the physics of discovery, how you can use astronomy to, she started with GPS and then traced that back, how you use a sextant and a compass to navigate, and how you use physics and the changing of the magnetic pole and all those things. And I taught about narratives of discovery, quite a bit in Spanish, translated into English, but also all just kind of other discoverers in the great age of discovery in the 18th century and earlier, but the age of discovery in the 18th century.
Well, what a great course for first-year students who are, just embarking on a career of discovery, hopefully, in college.
I'm sure, like any other course, there were ups and downs for them, but we did it twice and had great groups.
Good. Well, are there any other memories or stories about Randolph-Macon that we haven't touched on you'd like to share?
You make me think. It's what, like I said, it's been a wonderful career. People have asked me, well, why is it that you're retiring? And what I told Bob Lindgren at the holiday, the ceremony of the dinner this past year, I'm a forever Yellow Jacket, so it's not because of any factors. It's just because I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking forward to, doing other things, having more free time.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't have picked a better place to have a career.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a great place to be. So
Well,
I am very thankful for 21 years.
Well, that's great. Well, we're very thankful that we had 21 years with your enthusiasm and participation on campus.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Like Bob Lindgren said, don't make yourself a stranger. And
Right.
Don't worry.
You'll be around.
I will keep we're not going anywhere. So.
Good. Well, I hope to see you again in the library many times as you started that first time when you interviewed wandering through the McGraw-Page library. I hope you'll keep that tradition up.
Well, I will indeed. As you know, you and I have worked on some projects involving the library for the past quite a few years. So.
And those are coming to fruition, I
They
think. Talking about the Learning Commons,
Right.
that's going to be coming in the next couple of years. So, yeah, there'll be a lot of changes happening, and I expect you to be around to
Well, I've got to
see
come
'em.
see
Yeah.
what it's about, because you, Lily, Lauren Bell, and I took a couple of road trips to start getting ideas, and it's great to see it happening, and I know it will continue. So look forward to seeing that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mark Malin, for coming in to Making Memories.
Thank you, Lynda. I appreciate it.